Yiboneh, Yiboneh Hamikdash, Yitzion, Yitzion, Yitzion Temane. Yiboneh, Yiboneh, Yiboneh Hamikdash, Yitzion, Yitzion, Yitzion Temane. Yeshamash, Shir Chadash.
Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Welcome back to the Eretz Chemda Beit Midrash, where we are guests, and we're so happy to be here. We're in Parshat Teruma, and I just want everyone to know, first of all, a very warm welcome home to Torah. In Parshat Teruma, I gave this year many years ago, and it's very long, and what I did was, I kind of went slow in the beginning, and I rushed at the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the opposite, because I think the end is, look, it's all important. But the end I want to emphasize a little bit more. So what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to attempt to do in the first 10, 15 minutes, is give what we would call an overview of the first 2 pages, and then spend the next 45 minutes on the last 2 pages. I'm talking about from the Hebrew. So you all have only the last 2 pages in Hebrew, by the way. The ones I gave out, it's just the last 2 pages in Hebrew. But you could use, and I expect you to use the English sheets. Anybody that wants the English sheets should email me, and I send them in advance. But only if you email me at arondovid@yiboneh.com. Okay? You can find that on the website, our Yiboneh website, if you don't know how to spell it. So this is how we're going to do it. I'm going to use mainly the English, because I'm going to just translate it quickly from the Hebrew. By the way, if you do get on the email list to get the English sheets, you also get the Hebrew sheets. Not as pretty as the ones I have here, just simple black and white, but I encourage people to learn Hebrew so you can use on our website, download, or at least click on, and they can enlarge the Hebrew sheets. Okay, so just keep that in mind. In the meantime, I'm going to go quite quickly as an overview to the first 2 pages, which, again, you guys don't have here, and I didn't send them out either. We're dealing with Exodus chapter 25, verse 2 and 3. Now, I want to also mention, for those, I always mention, these are the fundamentals of Judaism. The Yakar here says this is the foundation of all foundations. What we're going to talk about tonight is the yesod of the yesodos of the Torah. Okay? It doesn't mean the secrets of, although you may think it of secrets, mystical secrets, but this is mamish, the foundation of what we call our religion. Okay. And you'll understand that clearly at the end. So verse 25, chapter 25, verse 2 and 3, that's number 1 in the source sheet. The first thing we know in Parshat Teruma is the word Teruma appears 3 times. Take for me an offering, right? And you shall take for me an offering. You should take my offering. So in Hebrew, the first thing it says, V'yichuli Teruma. Take from me, God says, take for me Teruma. And the second statement he says, Tichachu li Terumati. Tichachu et Terumati. Again, take my Teruma. And the third time Teruma is mentioned is the offering that you shall take from them. V'zot ha-Teruma asher tichachu mi'itam. Now, there's a lot of questions. I have 5 questions that the Yakar uses, and that's what I'm going to try to explain. Those 5 questions. But before we get to those 5 questions, know that there's a statement in between the first 2 Terumas from every person whose heart inspires him to generosity. The Hebrew is Me'et kol ish asher Yivenu libo. His heart is, as we're going to see, either it's nidav, it wants to willingly give, voluntarily. We have a lot of questions already, which I could, throw out, but I want to go in order. So we are now in Adar. It's Adar Aleph, but in the Jewish calendar year, when Adar begins, and we'll do it next month in Adar Bet, we start collecting the half shekels. Welcome back. We start collecting the half shekels for the temple. Now, we only do it as Zecher leMechatzis shekel, meaning only in order as a remembrance. Because back then, when we were building the Mishkan, and every year after, the half shekel would go toward the korbanos, to the upkeep. And that was hektish. That's called holy, and you could not use it for anything but the communal offerings. So keep this in mind. Just go back to a second. There were 3 trumas. We mentioned truma 3 times. The first truma Rashi mentions, and you can look, was for the sockets. We're going to call them Adonim, and we're going to discuss that name. The sockets that were underneath the tabernacle, holding up the planks. Okay, that's the first of the half shekel. The second half shekel was for the korbanos, for the offerings, for the communal offerings that were done throughout the year, meaning every day the daily offering, Shabbos, Musaf, and the Chagim, and whenever a communal offering needed to be done. The third offering, the third truma, was not a set amount. It wasn't a half shekel like the first 2, and it wasn't even obligatory in the same way. What people gave as the third truma was, as Rashi mentions, there were 13 materials mentioned in the section, and they were used for the work of the Mishkan, or for the garments of the Kohanim, or for the upkeep of the Mikdash itself, and so people donated for that. Okay, let's go on. Here are the 5 questions. After reading those verses, that one verse that we just said, well, it's actually verses 2 and 3 of chapter 25. So here are the 5 questions of number 3. If you look on the source sheet in English, there's 5 questions like this. This is the observance. He saw them and he was bothered enough to pose them to us. If you notice, the first 2 trumot, they relate somehow to Hashem, because God says, V'yichuchu li truma, as Rashi says, Lishmi. Somehow God is connected to one of those trumos, the first one. The second truma is Tichachu et trumasi. Take my truma, so God himself is relating to that truma. However, the third portion, it says, Tichachu mitam. God's name is not connected. God himself is not connected to the third truma, but rather the one who's giving it. Okay, that's going to be the first observation. Why is it like that? Number 2, there's a language that says, right, kicha, which take, and the word truma, which is the portion that's being given. So, if you notice, going back to source 1, it says take first, and then the offering. The yikachu li truma. The word taking appears before the word truma. The second time, in the second truma, tichachu et trumasi. Again, taking is before the word truma. The third truma, it says vota truma she tichachu. It's in reverse order. You have the word for the gift, for the portion, before the word taking. That would be his second observation. Why is it like that? Then we mentioned that the phrase, from each person whose heart inspires him to be generous, is actually stuck or inserted between the first truma and the second truma. Now, those trumot were actually obligatory and to be taken. So when you use the word take, it really means it's obligatory. And so the third one was not obligatory in the same way. You could give, and you brought whatever it is you wanted to. So why would the words, whoever's heart is motivating him, appear between the first 2, which is not dependent on the heart being motivated? That's his third observation. Why does that statement, why is it inserted between the first 2 portions? And then the fourth question, so in the third one, why does taking appear at all? Taking shouldn't even appear at all, because it's brought. And I'll show you where. If you go to source number 9, 35.5, chapter 35.5. It's number 9. It's on page 5. Right? Take from yourselves an offering for the Lord. Every generous-hearted person shall bring it. So it shows that you brought. It wasn't taken. That's his fourth observation. Why is taking at all mentioned? Even though it's out of order, what do you need that word mentioned at all? And then the fifth and last question Now, you may not notice this unless you knew Hebrew, but the first time take is used is in third person, and the second and third portion, it's mentioned that you shall take. So let's review that again. If you look at source number 1, it says, have them take from me. So the Hebrew, we said, was the yikachuli truma. They shall take from me truma. Whereas the second offering, it says, tikachu et trumasi. You, plural, should take from me the truma. And at the end, where it says, Vazo truma she tikachu mi'itam. This is the portion you, plural, shall take from them. Why is the first one in third person? That's nistar. And the second and third in second person, present, nokach. That's the Hebrew phrase that's used. Okay, so it's a lot to absorb here in these 5 questions. And I'm going to try to review them quickly, meaning the answers quickly, because what I want to really get to is the nut and bolts, the foundation of foundations of Judaism. Okay, so to answer some of the ideas, he does bring down an Abarbanel that mentions something, we do not count Jews. What do? They each give a coin and we count the coins. We all know that. However, according to the Abarbanel, there's no problem counting Jews. You don't have this on your sheets. This is a review. However, the Abarbanel does mention that when you do count, you need to give charity as a koifer nefesh, some kind of atonement for your souls. And I think this is going to relate to the answer we're going to talk about at the second part. Because your soul belongs to God. Okay? Your soul belongs to God. He created it. And the idea here, just by the way, when you count something, even the word noseh, we're going to talk about at the end, like Parshas noso, is, the idea of counting, making a census. So, in Parshas noso, by the way, you're talking about the leaders bringing korbanos for the altar, Chanuchas HaMizbeach. The word nasi, where you were the leader because you're chashuv. You only count things that are important. So the word naso, is also related to a census. In the meantime, the Yakar brings down the opinion of the Abarbanel. But what's most fascinating that the Yakar does bring down, and this is a very important point in our discussion, and that is, what is the statement Yivenu, right? I mentioned in our first verse that we're talking about, if you look at it again, that it says that in every person whose heart inspires him generously. Look at the word. It says, Asher Yivenu libo. We all know, Rashi says nidava. That is to, like volunteers. You guys are all volunteering, making tzitzis. You're mitnadivim. You're volunteers. There is a nun missing from this word. Now, under the laws of grammar, it makes sense. I don't know the laws of grammar well enough, but there is a specific rule that the nun would be dropped. Okay? So, the Yakar explains. Where does he explain it? Here, number 7. Look at number 7. Before we get to number 7, I do just want to give you some background why we don't count Jews. So when we form a minyan, meaning a prayer quorum, and we want to make sure there's 10 Jews, we can count seats, we can count yarmulkes, we can count prayer books. Some use a pasuk that has 10 words, and we count the words with each person. Basically, we see in King David's lifetime, he went, look at number 6, he went and counted the Jews, and there was a plague, and David himself said that he has sinned. Okay, and we'll have to talk about how even the Jews, or David, is able to, according to the Abarbanel, just give tzedakah after you count, and that should be okay. Look at number 7. It says the word Yivenu. There's an aleph and there's a bet. So aleph would be pasha pshat. It means giving with goodwill. Simple explanation. Rashi says an expression of goodwill. And in Old French, it's called present, meaning a present. What do you give? A present is a gift. Okay? So that's the way we're going to explain the first way. Yivenu, as the nun was dropped, but that's really part of the root, and it's a language of nidva. However, when you turn the page and look at the second explanation, this is something that the Yakar is going to explain at length. I'm going to try to sum it up. That basically there is no nun. It's not the word we were thinking of, but rather, so basically you have Yivenu. Now the word in the pasuk, it's with a bet, and he changes it with a vav. Now how can he do that? So it actually changes the whole meaning. You ever hear the expression, give until it hurts? Guys, have you ever heard that expression? Okay, so maybe you weren't at too many fundraising dinners. But at fundraising dinners, they would encourage you to give until it hurts, right? So if the word yidvenu with a vav instead of a bet means to ache, it's painful to give, right? You're hesitant to give. Now, how does the Yakar come across this idea? Quickly, if you look in number 8, there's a verse that says you shouldn't talk rachilis. Rachilis is gossip. How do we know rachil means gossip? Because Rashi explains that you're basically like a ragel. The gimel and the chaf are interchangeable. You're like a maragel, is like a spy. You're looking around, someone who's a yenta. They're looking around to find the dirt on someone else. So down below, in the middle of page 4, he explains how the different letters, there's 5 different parts of your mouth. There's 22 letters. Each one of the letters will fit into a category, whether it's the teeth, the lips, the tongue, the palate, or the throat. So there's in other words, there's each one of the 22 letters fits in a certain category, and once it's in that category, they can be exchanged. And we all know a vet, meaning a bet without the dot, a soft vet, has the same exact sound as a vav. Therefore, he claims that the yidvenu is not nidav as a free will offering, but rather giving until it hurts. And he kind of answers that point because he asked the question, how come yidvenu is placed between the 2 obligatory ones? So they're the ones that are obligatory. Okay. Then the next thing the Yakar brings down is so the Gabbai, the collectors, they would actually be appointed. Speak to the children of Israel, they should collect for me. Remember we said, why is it in third person? So they should collect. It's the Gaboim, but it's teaching you something. That the Gaboim have to give first before they collect from other people because of a famous concept that you have to ornament yourself, make yourself better, improve yourself before you go and try to improve others. And the Gaboim are trying to help us by reminding us to pay the debt that we all have to pay the dues to the temple. So before they can collect, they have to collect from themselves first. So that's a very important point, especially because of the vav, right? And it says, v'yikachu, and they shall, meaning and they shall collect. Once you say and they shall collect, what is it? Why do you need and? It's because they have to give first. Okay, that's a very important point. When it says specifically by collecting, it says v'aval me'et kol ish asher yidvenu libo. We already said it's the heart that is in pain by giving. The giver is pained. Okay, he doesn't want to give miratzon tov. He's not giving from the bottom of his heart. In fact, when someone comes to collect, he might argue with them. That's why it says tichachu. The next statement is you shall collect. Who's you? Moshe and Aaron, or somebody who's chashuv. You know that when someone who's very important, the mayor of the city, comes to your house because they're putting a playground up or whatever, you might give more than if some, simple tax collector comes, right? When the Rosh Hashiva comes, when some chashuv person comes to collect money, then you might, most likely, will give more. So this is actually not only to send the regular Gaboim, but to send the more chashuv geboim. Going back to the Arbanel, he explains a little bit more, which I'm going to skip. So now we're on our page, Shin Bet, and it's very important to understand because we're talking about God's attachment of His own name to those, the first two, right? V'yichuli and Trumati. So the Kli Yakar says they're actually kofer nefesh, like the Abarbanel explained. Even though we don't paskin like the Abarbanel that we count Jews, but we have to understand what the Abarbanel was trying to say. That somehow it's kofer nefesh by counting Jews, which is okay, according to him, and then giving money, because somehow or another, and look in chapter 30, verse 15, so you'll look, that's number 10. It says, the rich shall give no more, the poor shall give no less. So everyone actually had to give the exact same amount, with which to give the offering to the Lord to atone for your souls. What atonement is it? So the whole concept of the temple, the Mishkan, has the altar. It's going to atone for our souls, and there's so many things besides. By the way, just so you should know, when it comes, Christians want to claim that we need this Yashka guy for some reason, because without a blood atonement, you can find no atonement. There are so many things going on in our Mishkan that have to do with atonement. From the different begadim of the different clothing of the Kohanim. I just want to tell you that a premeditated sin, there's no prescribed korban. It's only for shogeg. Okay, shogeg means inadvertent, and when Mashiach comes, sin offerings will still be brought. It talks about this in the Navi. Because shogeg will still happen. Shogeg is inadvertent. You're not rebelling against God. When God's obvious presence is filled in the world, when Mashiach comes, people will still inadvertently sin. There will no longer be any rebels. So korbanos will still be brought. But this is a misnomer amongst the Christians. They think that somewhere in Leviticus, it's only through the blood sacrifice will you find atonement. God already set up, when you rebel against God, He wants your tshuva. He wants you to do tshuva, and that's the only prescribed method, period. Okay? Nobody has to die for anybody's sins, right? It's the inadvertent ones that are because of negligence that this is supposed to get you a little bit more motivated to learn the halachot and be aware. Okay? So since we say this is a kofer nefesh, it's an atonement for your souls. I want you to look in Yecheskel, because this is also key. In Ezekiel, look at number 11, and behold, all souls are mine. God, right? Hein kol hanafoshos li. All souls belong to God. And you know what? It's a chesed of Hashem Yisbarach to take that half shekel from us as a trumat hanefesh in what's the word I'm looking for? Trumat. Not just Temurat, in exchange for our souls. That's Temurat HaNefesh, in exchange for our souls. This was there's no blood atonement here. There's no blood. We're talking about money. Maybe that's why we call blood damim. Damim is the same word as blood. But anyway, so here we have Al Keinemar Bereshona. That's why the first time it says Yichuli, you shall take from me. God's name is attached. Ubishnia, the second time, is Trumati. Kishem Hashem Nikra Lehem. God's name is called upon them. But when it came to the third one, She'ena Choiva, there's no obligation. Lo Yichasel Hashem Yisbarach. Utlo B'mitnadvim. It's not attached to God's name, but to the person who's giving it. And that's why it says, Zot hatruma shetichachu mitam. It says you're going to take it from them. It's talui behem. It's dependent on the giver. That's why it says mitam. V'lo me'et Hashem. It's not from Hashem. So the first two is atonement for your soul. No blood. It's just blood money. It's just money. Okay? And now this is the part I want to go slow with. Everything up until this point was preliminary. Hine, karov lishmo atam acher, al ma sheyiche shtei trumot rishonot el Hashem yisbrach v'lo hashlishi. We're now going into the clear cars. He wants you to pay attention. He claims it's easy to understand. Another reason why Hashem's name is attached to the first two trumos, but not to the third. Lefi shebekol makom yesh sham geder anava v'hakna'a bein atachtonim. Every place where you have within the framework of humility, and another word for humility, hakna'ah, submission, amongst the humans, amongst us, sham chevyon uzo shel kadosh baruch hu. That's where you find the might, the hidden might of God. When you are humble, when you feel, and I'm going to use the word lowly, but we'll understand it, hashochen et docha v'shval ruach. That is where Hashem's presence, his Shekhinah will dwell. Who? With the contrite, with the humble, the Shefel Ruach. And if I'm not mistaken, it means the meek. Okay, and I just want to show you that, again, in this Christian religion, they claim, oh my God, this guy is like coming out with all kinds of beautiful sayings, like love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that's in our Bible, right? How about the idea that who's going to inherit the earth? The humble. Look at number 16, 37, Psalms 37:11. But the humble shall inherit the earth. In Hebrew, you're talking about anavim, yirshu aretz. The meek shall inherit the earth. Okay? So going back to the Kli Yakar, these are old Torah ideas. Old meaning before that guy walked the earth, if he did. Aval b'kol makom sheyesh nidnud gava, meaning wherever there's a place, even a tinge of haughtiness, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu rotz liyached shmo yisbrach sham. Hashem does not want to unify, does not want to connect His name to that. Now, the first two trumos, lefikach shtei trumas rishonos, shahayis yad kol adam shava behem. Every giver had to give exactly the same amount, as the verse says. Ha'oisher ha'ashir lo yarve v'adal lo yamit, in verse 30, verse 15, chapter 30, verse 15, that the rich cannot give more and the poor cannot give less. Ein makom l'shum echad. There's no place for anyone, not one person, lehit pa'er al chavero, to be proud over his friend, to pride, to have some kind of self-glorification over his friend by saying to him, ha ha ha, trumati gedola mitrumatcha, that my gift was bigger than your gift. Otan yiches Hashem yisbrach alav. No, once they're all equal, then Hashem will relate to it. Kiba Rishon, remember in the first Teruma it says yichuli, it's you shall take for me. And Rashi says, l'shmi, for my namesake. Ki kavar biyarna lamala tchilas parshas Miketz. And we're going to look at chapter 20, verse 21. That's number 12. Very important idea that this verse says, whenever I allow my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. So we see that God is allowing His name to be united and combined with these trumot. Remember, we already said, first of all, that the soul is finding its atonement. The soul, we are part of God. We are a chelik me Elokai mimal. Okay, so when we're doing the right thing, we're going to be blessed. Hashem will bless us. And this altar, this idea of the altar, that the korbanos, we're going to see the korbanos are brought on the altar. What is the altar? The altar is made out of adamah. What are we? We're Adam. And the altar is made from adamah. So when we're going to, as we're going to see, the reason for bringing the korbanos is to break this spirit. Now, that doesn't make sense in English, but it's shefel ruach, or as we're going to see, a concept called shvuras hanefesh. It's basically the point where I think it means getting rid of the ego. When we can get rid of the ego, because it's the problem. it's a setup, these first two, where nobody's able to say, I gave more. We're going to see the third one where anybody can give wherever they want. That's going to be a problem, and God does not attach his name to that because of the possibility of somebody tripping up and putting their ego in. And we're going to see it very clearly soon.
Yud-Kei Vav-Kei,
What's Yud-Kei Vav-Kei?
Hashem's name, the exclusive name.
We're going to see it right now. He says like this. Shekol otiot Hashem hagadol, that every one of the four letters of God's great name actually is Marim al Geder Anava. It actually teaches and reflects this concept. Now, you just mentioned Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. How does Yud-Kei Vav-Kei teach us humility? There's a statement in the Gemara that says, everywhere you find his greatness, you find his humility. Wait till you see the chart I have here in number 18. And I actually made a large copy. I don't know if you can see it. But basically, if you notice that Hashem's own name. Okay, let me just explain about Gematria. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2. Each letter has a numerical value. However, on the right side, you'll notice that it's called the Gematria Milui. Milui means its fullness. So Aleph is Aleph Lamed Pei. You spell the letter. And therefore, 1 and 30 and 80 is 111. Bet, which we normally would say is 2, is 2, and then 10, and then 400, because Bet Yud Tet, it's 412. If you take a quick look, the lowest, besides Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, look at the chart, you'll see, Gimel 73, Lamed is 74, Zion is 77. Those are like the three lowest, but they go into the hundreds. Even 400. Several of them are like up to 400. But Yud, Hey, and Vav, Hey spelled out all together is 54. I mean, this is 4 letters. Imagine any other word has to have at least 2 letters, and most have 3. God created the language, right? He created everything in the universe. He created the language, and he chose for his own name the smallest. Where you find his greatness, you find his humility in his own name. I mean, I'll say it anyway. A guy by the name of Trump. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but if you built a hotel or a resort or a casino, you put your name up there. I mean, your name's up there. It's all about you. Well, Hashem, in his own name, made it so diminished in terms of the value. This is mind-blowing. But this is the point. We are created the image of God. We are supposed to imitate God. And as we will see, that when it comes to that third, we'll see all three trumos are going to reflect this idea in a big way. V'chein hadavar hanase min shtei trumot elu doime el hatruma atzma. Wow. Ready for this? All things, similarly, the thing that is produced from those first 2 trumos are made similar to the giver, to the one who's giving it or the offering it itself. Remember that they're all equal, meaning the money. Ki kashem shekulan hayoshavim bo, just as all of them were exactly the same. Not only the half shekel that you gave, every Adonim was the same. 1 second. V'loya bashum hit nasut le'echad al chavero. There wasn't any room, there was no place, there wasn't any possibility of raising yourself up over anyone else. Okay? Kach na'aseh mitruma achas adanim. And that's exactly what was made from the first truma, was these silver sockets for the inner, the tabernacle. Kikol ha'adanim. Remember, even the name sounds strange. Adonim. It sounds like the word Adon. Hayushavim echad kamo chavero. Every socket, it was like a rectangular, like think of like a cinder block. Most cinder blocks seem to have these holes in them. Of course, that's for the rebar and to fill with cement. But these were for the planks that had 2 protrusions, and they were interlocked with each other, and therefore it stabilized and held up the walls of the tabernacle. And they were all like each other. Hayu tachtonim lekol habinyan. Ready for this? You kind of have to, I would ask for a drum roll here, but one second. That they were underneath. They were tachtonim of the entire building. Ka'as kupa hanidreshet. Like a doormat that was treaded upon. Hayu yesodos lekol habinyan. That was the foundation of the entire building. And therefore, going back to those other verses, if you look at, did I skip it? One second. I think it's on the next page. Yeah, look at 19 and 20. So this is really weird, odd, that you have two verses. It's really not that odd in Psalms. But you have two verses that are exactly the same. Page 8. 19, it's Psalms 115, verse 8. Like them shall be those who made them. Both verses. Kamohem uosehem. So basically, think about it. You're giving for what? For the foundations of the tabernacle, a half shekel. It's all equal. Everyone's made equal. And they're all the same. That's what you're becoming like. What you're making is what you are becoming like. Like them shall be those who make them. Kamohem uosehem. You're becoming that which you're giving for. Okay? Then the Yakar goes on, he says, Kikamo ha'oisim hanadava hahi, just like the ones who are doing and producing this gift, hahi hayu shavim b'netina. They're all equal in their giving. V'lo haya shum echad mehem, and it's not possible for any one of them hit nasut al chavero, to raise himself up over his fellow. Kak na'asu mehem adonim elu, and that's what was made from them, these adonim, these sockets. Now, what do the sockets represent? Hamorim al geder nava. They're actually representing and teaching us how to be humble. Ki anava hi yisoda binyan, because anavut, this concept of humility, is the foundation of the entire structure of the temple, of the tabernacle. Asher olav kol be'Yisrael nachun, which we, the Jewish people, are founded and based on this humility. V'nikru b'shem Adonim. Why are they called Adonim? It's a very strange name. Sheyesh b'mashma'uto lashon adnus usrara. It's true. This is the base. And yet, the name itself implies mastery and authority. So what's going on? It's the base? Yan, you know why? Because kikol mi she'oisa et atzmo ka'as kupa hanidreshes milamata. Anyone who makes themselves, and I don't think it's literal, you don't have to be an actual doormat, but it means within the framework of humility and modesty, down here below in our world, what's God going to do? Na'aseh Adon milamala. Then you will be made a master in the upper worlds, in the spiritual world. And here, drum roll please, in Gemara Erevin, in page 13b, which I do have, I just want to read the verse, the statement first. Kikol hamash pil atzmo, anyone who lowers themselves, Kadosh Baruch Hu is magbihu. Hashem will raise him up. We have this in, we can find it here. Look at number 13 on page 6. This is to teach. This happens to be, why do we paskin like Beis Hillel over Beis Shammai? That's what the Gemara in Erevin is discussing. Now, the truth is, the reason we paskin like Hillel over Beis Shammai is because he had more students. He had more students. We go by the majority. But the question the Gemara really wants to know is, why did he have more students? So he always allowed the other, meaning Beis Shammai, to speak first, to explain his stance. And you know what? If he agreed, there was no argument. But at least he could repeat back, is this what I hear you saying? And then he would say, well, I disagree with it if he disagreed. But this Gemara now describes the character trait of a Nava. In other words, why did he have more students? This is to teach you that anyone who humbles himself, the Holy One, blessed be He, exalts him. And anyone who exalts himself, the Holy Blessed One, humbles him. Now the Hebrew is beautiful. It's actually on the next page. But L'lemadcha shekola mashpil atzmo kadosh baruch hu magbiho, and the kola magbiya atzmo kadosh baruch hu is mashpilolo. Now the next part of the Mishnah, anyone who seeks greatness, greatness flees from him. And conversely, anyone who flees from greatness, then greatness seeks and chases after him. Kol machzir al hagdula, gedula borachat mimenu, kol boreach min gedula, gedula machzeret achara. And then the last part, anyone who attempts to force the moment and expends great effort to achieve an objective precisely when he desires to do so, means he really has no patience, and he wants what he wants when he wants it. The moment forces him to, and he's unsuccessful. Conversely, anyone who is patient and yields to the moment stands by his side, and he will ultimately be successful. I don't have for you the copy that I have in front of me, but this is from the Ben Yehoyada. That's the Ben Ish Chai on this particular Gemara, and it's beautiful, and I'll try to sum it up. But the first thing he quotes, and remember, you don't have it, is he quotes the Maharal, but in the Gemara itself, there's a Beis Yosef on the Gemara, and there's the Maharal on the Gemara, and I want to read that first. Basically, if the halakha is going to go like Hillel, we're basing it on the fact because he was nice and humble, he was kind and patient and humble. Does that make sense? We're talking truth. We want truth. So the Beis Yosef says that it's actually, you might have thought, right, and it is true, that a Nava actually is a good midah, and it's the opposite of Shammai, it is the opposite of Din, but the real reason is, Machmas Anava Vaday Zachu L'chavein Ha'emet. It is like, if you want to have a sense of prophecy, you want to be able to see the truth, you have to get rid of the ego. The ego is, obviously, it's the Yetzer Hara. I mean, it's blinding and it's opaque, but once you can get rid of that ego, then you can see clearly the truth. Okay, so it's very important, according to the Beis Yosef, to explain it that way. The Maharal explains, Kevan shenoichin lelubin hayu, that the very fact that he was kind and humble, lo mitarei b'vikuach shalehem, he would never enter into any argument, shum tzad, of any particular side, shel hanitzchot, at least the winning side. Remember, he could, because he has a majority of students, simply stop all debates. What do they do in the Congress? They can, there's a certain statement that they do when they extend a debate. They can end the debate. Well, here, right, he could stand la'amid divreihem, but he didn't. Elakol divreihem amitiim legamrei lekach halacha kamotam. He wouldn't stand on principle that he has a majority. He would engage anyway in the debate to get to the truth, because he was able to see the truth clearly because of his humility. That is the way that the Maharal explains it. However, the Ben Yehoyada explains it a little bit differently. And I'm going to try to sum it up, because it's very long. Is basically, he says all three of these ideas. We're talking about, as the Mishnah had said, that about if you humble yourself, you bring yourself down, you'll be brought up. He says that has to do with wisdom, chachmas haTorah, and then he said anybody who seeks greatness, that has to do with like power, and then anyone who attempts to force the moment, that has to do with money. And he says this is all intertwined. They're all intertwined, and he basically says Hashem will, like, it's almost like a wave. You're riding a wave. all three of these ideas are all intertwined. So if you lower yourself, then God will raise you up in one of these areas, but then push you down in another area. And once you tasted that greatness in that area, you know it tastes good, and you want more. So you're motivated to rise again, and you'll rise again, and then Hashem will bring you down. And with all three of these ideas, and the example he gives is from King David himself. I'll just read the words. Came to us, l'tivuta, gam came, nisvachim zebezeh, that all three of these good qualities, they're all intertwined. Kol hamashbil atzmo kedavid hamelech, alav shalom. Anyone who brings themselves down, humbles themselves like King David did. He was ro'et zon. He was, He was a shepherd, lo kapid akvodo. He was not concerned about his honor. And what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? He raised up Dovid HaMelech. Shalachach min hanave mi'achrei hatzon u'nimshach lemelech al pi Hashem sha'amar, as we see in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1. So basically, God took him from that position. He lowered himself to be a lowly shepherd, and Hashem made him king. As Samuel says, in God's name, Kiri'iti bibanav li melech. I have seen a king for myself among his sons. But God is saying, I see him above me. He's like my king. Rabbi Zal, kaviyacho alai melech, as if he's a king over me. And now, after Shanim Shachla Melech Barak Min Gedula, remember, even though he was king, he was crowned king, he was appointed king, he ran away and he went back to the sheep, right? He became a shepherd and he was a slave to King Saul. He didn't rebel against King Saul to take the kingship away from him while he was alive. And what happened? The kingship returned to King David because he went back to being a humble guy. God eventually caused that King Saul and all his children would die. And shortly afterwards, King David himself took the kingship over all of Israel. And even his enemies were made peace with him. Now, after he was king of all Israel, then his son Absalom created a rebellion. And King David left Yerushalayim, the throne of kingship, to fight with Absalom and anybody that assisted him. But he did not force the hour, right? The last piece. Barach Yerushalayim, he ran away from Yerushalayim. He didn't stand there and fight in Yerushalayim. Gamet even Shimi ben Geri, he cursed him, but he didn't attack. King David did not attack him. He waited until the right time. Because he was patient, then time caught up, and he was, of course, crowned king, and he didn't have to run away anymore. Even Absalom was killed, and all of Israel returned and was submissive to the king and enjoyed his kingship. Okay, so now I want to get to the last part of the Yakar, because this is fundamental of all fundamentals. So now, if we're on Shin Bet, we are where are we? Oh, here, where we just said these things are called Adonim, right in the middle of the third paragraph. There's a inference from the word Adonut, and Srara, some type of mastery and authority. And that we said is if you make yourself like a doormat down below, Nase Adon milamala. So we just saw Erevin, fine. So here he says, Oise oto yesod. So if you make yourself part of this foundation, Noise lekol abinyan, you end up carrying and bearing on your weight, on your shoulders, the entire building. Ka'adonim elu, just like these sockets. Shuhu yesod v'noise lekol abinyan. They are the foundation and the carrier of the entire building. And he describes the word nasi. Now, in our parsha, we'll see, nasi is plural, and it should have two yuds. Okay, we'll get that in a second. But the word nasi is prince. By the way, it means to carry, right? We spoke about that. It's to carry, to make important. And even the word for marriage, right, is nisui, is to be married. because you're carrying each other. And not only that, I remember seeing once, I don't know if Jews do this, but Goyim, on the wedding night, the man picks up his wife and carries her over the threshold. I don't know what they call it, but imagine the word marriage means to carry. Pirusha shehu noise et acherim, because they are carrying others. You become lifted up to a high position because you're carrying, right? You're caring for others. Kikulam nishanim olav, that everyone is dependent on him. Okay. Now, what about the second truma? We said that was for the korbanos. Utruma shnia haviu korbanos sibor. That's where the community offerings were taken from that pushka, from that piggy bank, so to speak. Shugab came shavim b'kol yom. Every single day we had the daily offering, one in the morning and one in the evening. And I brought that verse down just so you know that it's there somewhere. Keves echad, it's in chapter 29, verse 39. There was one lamb brought in the morning and the second one brought in the afternoon. But most important, this is where we're going to get to, is in Psalms 51:19. Where is that on the source sheet? That would be number 15. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit. Somebody asked, what do we need? God doesn't need anything. Everybody knows that. Anybody that believes in God, our God, the God of Israel, he's not lacking anything and he doesn't have any real needs. Okay? So what does he want? Your korbanos. The word korban means actually to come close. So this is the way. I don't like sacrifices is not a good translation. Offerings is probably better. But here, this is Chabad.org. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit. You will not despise a broken and crushed heart. Okay, so going back to the idea that this is really the purpose of Zivchei Elokim. It says in Psalms 51:19, the offerings of God are a broken spirit. Ruach nishbara, meaning to say, Tachlit hazvachim, the purpose, the sole purpose of these offerings, lahavi et Adon lidei ruach nishbara, to bring a person to this point. Now, according to the Ramban, he explains that when you see your korban being offered, you imagine, wow, that's what I deserve, or that could have been me. Something to that extent. So that should bring a humility and a broken spirit in a healthy way. Al kein yichase gam kein elav yisbarach. This is why they're related. The first one is related to God, because God's there because your ego's gone. And the second, your ego is also gone. So we had in the second case, we're calling it Ruach Nishbara. And in the first case, we called it, so by the korbanos, we used Shefel Ruach, which will just translate as humility and humbleness. And over here, Ruach Nishbara, a broken spirit, but it's equal, it's equivalent. It's the idea of humility. Okay, so that's why Hashem can attach himself. As it says, Tichechu et trumati, that, right, they shall take from me my truma. You shall take from me my truma. Lefi hatruma va'asui mimenu hakomora al-geder nava. The very idea, you're offering money and you're making from it, the result is the korbanos. Therefore, the idea is, remember we said, you are like what you give. When you give, you become that. So you're giving and you're becoming humble. Al-Kain Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu Zihu Trumati. So we understand why God said, this is my truma. He can attach himself. When you become humble, he will attach himself. You do not act in a humble way, he will not attach himself. Simple as that. Aval Truma Shlishit. Now we run into a problem, because the third truma, you can give as much or as little as you want. And you would have to admit this is quite challenging. Right? Because you could easily say, hey, I gave more than the other guy. And we probably would. Shelo ayu kola shavim ba. Right? That truma, we're now on Shinai and Gimel. Not everyone gave the same amount. Hayu mitchalfim b'chot v'yater. Remember, some people give more or less. Ha'ashir nosein harbe. The rich person might give a lot. Yesh lo makam. And there's room or space to say, to lihit nasut al ha'ani. To feel proud right, to raise himself up over the poor person. And what would he say? Yesh li chelek gadol bebeit Elokeinu yoter min ani. I have a bigger portion in the house of God, right, in the synagogue, than the poor person. Bahar boti mohar umatan, right, because the abundance of gifts. Al ke na'asu mimenu kol kli hektish. He might even say, they made the Aron Kodesh because of me. They made the candelabra because I gave all that money. Kama Aron, menorah, v'shulchan, mizbeach, and any other of the kelim. So without any doubt, shahaya yitaron liktzatan al kitzatam. So therefore he would feel, or they would feel superior over others. You even have a gold crown on some of these items, right? On the Aron HaKodesh, you had Keter Torah. You had a crown. On the Mizbeach, that would be Keter the Kahuna. The Zar, the crown on the Shulchan, Neged Keter Malchut. So by the way, just you should know. So to have the Keter Kahuna, your father had to be a Kohen. To have Keter Malchut, your father had to be from Dovid HaMelech and Shlomo. Keter Torah was Hefker L'Kol. Anybody could acquire Keter Torah. And he says, Afal pi shekfi kedushas hakelim hayalo lahakadosh baruch hu liaches nedava zu alav yisbarach. So you might have thought, oh, it's to these fantastic vessels, and the guy gave extra, so of course he's relating to Hashem. No, makom makom miaches mitzad gevias nedava. From the very fact that there's geviat hadadava hayasham tzad gaiva, the very fact that they're collecting these gifts. Nevertheless, there still is place for pride and haughtiness. Right? Gava v'hitnatsus lamarbe al hama'it, to the one who gave more over the one who gave less. Al kain lo yechasek kadosh baruch hu alav, and that's why God's name is not attached to that third category where people could and might exalt themselves. Now, one of the questions not really mentioned in the beginning, but everything he relates to is going to answer this question. The question we did not ask, how come, right, when it says the 13 ingredients, starts out with gold, and then silver, and then copper, and it goes through all the list, and you would say, and Rashi does say, this is the order of chashivus, or the value, but all of a sudden at the end, it's talking about these special stones. And the special stones, like one little diamond, can be worth a lot more than some gold. So it sounds like it's out of order. And the Yakar is now going to answer that question based on the thesis that he said up until now. And at the end he says, this is the foundation of all foundations of the Torah. So listen well. And now I can see the ability to answer one very important question. After the fact that we consider the list originally as a list of what's considered important or valuable, starts out with Zahav, then Kesef, and Nechoshes. If that's the case, then why at the end do you have Avnei Shoham v'Avnei Miluim? Right? So the answer is Ki Avanim b'li safek. Well, this is part of the question. Avanim b'li safek hem Yikarim yoter min hazav. We already know that the stones can certainly be much more expensive than the gold. So you're actually able to answer by saying, we all know, if you look at Rashi in chapter 35:27, let's find it. It's number 21. Rashi mentions that you know what the princes decided to do? Now we have to find out what was their motivation. They said, let everyone else have a chance. Let them all bring their donations, and at the end, we're so rich, we'll just fill in the blanks. Whatever's missing, we'll fill in. But guess what? They missed their opportunity. Everything was collected. So we're going to see, I have it underlined, since at first they were lazy, Rashi says. They did not immediately donate. A letter is missing from their name. Nesi'im is written with one yud, but I told you it's plural, right? And it should have two yuds. One yud is missing. And we spoke about the Yud, which we're going to see why is that Yud missing, Ephraim? Why is that Yud missing? Why is that extra Yud missing from their name? So let's go back now into the Kli Yakar. And he says, okay, we saw Rashi. Al kain hiskir nidavatam b'achrona. And that's the reason why they're mentioned last, because they were lazy and they brought it at the end. But actually according to the haughtiness of the Nisim. That's why, according to our way of explaining, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to teach them laharos. She'echad hama'it ve'echad hamarbe. You know what? In this case, one can give more, one can give less. Hakol shavim lifnei Hashem yisbrach. But everyone in the end is going to be equal in God's eyes. Alkin hisker chashuv himself. That's why the most important people were mentioned at the end. And there won't be this haughtiness of the rich person over and above the poor person by saying, Nidbati gedoyle, I gave more. Hakasuv mana barosh. Right? It should have been written in the beginning, but it wasn't. And furthermore, hiskir nidvatam be'achrona. In the end, what happens? Their donation is mentioned last. Lefi sharum levavam. That is an expression of haughtiness. Haviam lidei zeh. Right? It was the haughtiness that brought them to this point. Shehitnadvu levasof. That they ended up donating at the end by saying, this is what they said. Yitnadvu atzibor. Let everyone else give first. Umashem mechasrim. Anu mashlimi. Whatever they're lacking, whatever ends up lacking, we'll fill in the blanks. We'll pay. We'll complete. Kol zederek gava v'gaod. This is a very haughty and arrogant thing to do, or to say. To say yesh le'el yadenu limlot mashem mechasrim. If anybody says, I have in my ability, I have the power to complete whatever you lack, Al kain hiskir nidvata machrona. That's why their gift is written last. Ki kol ha-magbiya et atzmo. Anyone who exalts themselves, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mashpilo, brings them down. V'lo, not only that, the word nasim is chaser yud. It's missing a yud. As you saw, you can look in the verse, chapter 35, verse 27. Kirak os achas min Hashem. This is the only letter in that word, Nisiim, right? Nisiim, that is God's, that's one of the letters of God's name. That's missing a yud, because if it was plural, it should have two. The hainu a yud. V'ayidei shehitnasu bidvreihem, Lachach Hashem min shamam oszem mishamo yisbarach. That it was because of this display of arrogance through their words that Hashem took away His own letter from that name. Hamara kulu ageder anava. This exactly according to the Kli Yakar. His thesis, his premise is that it all teaches you how important a nava is. K'mevar b'pasuk, like we saw earlier on in chapter 20, verse 21. Every place that I allow my name to be mentioned, I will come to you with a blessing. So we understand this is so important. That's the temple, that's the tabernacle. This is right. And when we act in humility, when we imitate Hashem, and it's a mastery, it's not easy. I mean, we're flesh and blood. God created us that way. We all have an ego. Yeah, even me. I got a big one. It's worthwhile working on. He says, this is how he ends. Davar zeh sod miyasodos haTorah. I mean, hats off to the Kli Yakar, that this is the greatest, either fundamental concepts or greatest secrets of the Torah. And he ends by saying that Tzuras HaYud, the actual, right, the Yud is raised from it's like the smallest letter, but it's also raised up. It's high up there. We're called, what do we call it? We're called Yidden. We Jews are called little Yuds. We're Yuds, Yidden. So the Tzuras HaYud, the way you write the Yud is Marigam Kain Alanava V'Katnut. In other words, it's the smallest letter. It's the most humblest letter. There's a lot more we can discuss, but I do want to end just with one verse because we are in a certain situation. I'm not going to get into it because I don't want to get thrown off YouTube. So anybody who has a brain and a mind can understand this. It says in Malachi, look at number 22. Chapter 1 of Malachi, verse 4 and 5. Should Edom say, we were poor, but we will return and build the ruins, right? I don't want to talk about who Edom could be or might be. So said the Lord of hosts, they shall build, but I will demolish, and they shall be called the border of wickedness, and the people whom the Lord has damned forever. And your eye shall see, and you shall say, the Lord is great beyond, where? Beyond the border of Israel. Rashi says, we were poor, meaning the verse says it. Edom says, we were poor. If Edom says, at first we were poor, but now we will be rich from the spoils of Jerusalem. I'll just say this. Anybody who thinks they can come up against us and fight with us and say, after they are defeated, that they will come back again and again and again. So the Lord is great beyond the border of Israel. Don't waste your time. Just surrender. Surrender. Anyway, I'll just read the Rashi. This is based on Yonatan, rendering, may the glory of God be magnified as he has widened the border of Israel. The Yidden, by nature, I know we have certain chutzpah. I get it. I know we're, what's the word? Stiff-necked. I get it. That works to our benefit because we are so stubborn. We're going to stick with this no matter what. At the same time, we are very humble, and you can see the whole world is seemingly, allegedly against us, but we will prevail. And I wish everybody mamish halada hatzlacha and a Shabbat shalom. And Purim's coming up, but it's still another month and a week away. But anyway, have a Shabbat shalom and a great life, and we'll see you next week, B'ezrat Hashem.
It's